we can proceed with our first presentation. So our first speaker is Alexa Vara from the University of Reading in the UK, and she will be talking about higher biodiversity and pollination service in temperate agroforestry than in monoculture.
Very short, if you have a question, we decided to collect the question at the end of the presentation. We have 20 minutes around, maybe less because we are later. So if you have question, please write in this, not in the chat, but in the question and answer the menu. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, please.
Okay.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
very well.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, thank you. Alexa, the floor is yours.
I think Alexa was the one that was not present.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Would it be okay then for you that we wait for Alexa, and that you will start your presentation?
Martin.
Okay. Okay. So we continue with our second presentation, and our second speaker is Martin Biele from the University of Kassel in Germany, and the title of his presentation is Characterization and Management of Russian Olive, a session in Gilgit-Baltistan, northern Pakistan. Martin, the floor is yours.
So I hope you can listen to me. Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
yes.
And I will just start the presentation. Yeah, thank you for accepting our abstract on Russian olive in central highland areas of Pakistan. In fact, when I look at the different topics of this session, I see that it might be rather a case study and really focused on one particular species. Nonetheless, I try to be as accurate and as interesting I hope that it's interesting enough to present here in the frame of the OIRAF conference. Some of you might know the species. I'm sure most of you know, although it's not native all over the globe, but it's rather a native species of Central and Western Asia, which is the so-called silver foliage or Elaeagnus angustifolia, also sometimes called Russian olive. The name Russian olive stems from the fact that the fruits resemble quite a lot to the normal olive, which is, by the way, another family. Here we talk about the Elaeagnaceae family. We had a kind of fast appraisal study in the northern regions of Gilgit-Baltistan with a rather focus on the management and the use of the species in the region, because we wanted to get to know what contribution the species has on agroforestry, local agroforestry systems in northern regions of Pakistan. You see on the left-hand side a typical assemblage of these trees. In the upper picture, rather, let's say a wild stand, although it's often also managed areas, but rather unattended, maybe just a browsing forage area for livestock. Below you see even planted orchards. There are some varieties known that are cultivated in these lands, but nonetheless, there is no comparison to other fruit crops like apple, apricot, mulberry, walnut that are very prominent examples from prominent fruit trees of this species. So our main objectives was to determine the morphological, phenotypic and biochemical variation in the region, as well as to record and to assess the socioeconomic conditions of collectors and traders, and to see a bit what is actually, what can be improved for this crop and for the communities there. By the way, the species is also quite, it's comparatively well studied because it's also an invasive species. Particularly our North American colleagues and Australian colleagues will say a lot of things against this species because it's really invasive character. The origin of the species is not yet known. It might be somewhere in Western or Central Asia. It's quite cold and dry, drought resistant, and therefore also used to reclaim soil. In addition, that it's also a nitrogen fixating plant. So it's a multi-purpose plant with high ecological relevance, but of course, a kind of invasive behaviors. We are here in the northern regions of Pakistan. Those that have not yet been to Pakistan or not familiar with the region, it's completely different to the mainland Pakistan, Punjab, lowland area. So it's really a kind of Central Asian type of ethnicity and environment up there. We have here highest mountain peaks of more than 8,000 meters altitude and very fertile but human-made agricultural lands. For the species, we had a multi-purpose approach where we looked on the dendrology by looking as well as morphological aspects, TBH, leaf and fruit. We assessed here qualitative as well as quantitative characters. We looked on the biochemistry of the fruits because these are known for dietary purposes, quite useful, but also for cosmetics and also for medicinal purposes. And we assessed the socioeconomic condition of traders and collectors in the region. Some first results on the morphology of this fruit. We found a high variation, and we could also say that the fruits in general were larger than in Iran, in Turkey, and similar to Indian accessions, which could be related to maybe a lack of management in the region because pruning obviously also increases fruit size and quality. We found also quite interesting and rarely found aspect that fruits are larger in higher altitudes, which is ecologically not well explained. There's only a few examples but not in Central Asia, what we have found so far. So this is something we would maybe look further on. We also performed PCAs on fruit parameters, and we found, and later on applied cluster analysis, and we found that there's actually a high variability of one cluster with large fruits and rather low variability with particular small fruits. Because of this high variability of fruits, we also see that the discrimination was quite difficult, and the access for PCA explained rather or only slowly increased to explain different variations found. On the biochemistry side, we found that variation was similarly variable or showed a strong range. The radical scavenging activity was found to be lower in Turkey, but higher in Iran. Also flavonoids and tannins were on the one hand side low in Iran and Russia, as well as higher in Iran for tannins. So we can't really say that this is something we found high variability, but it's rather difficult to assess the real cause of it. We have not included genetic analysis, which might explain a bit more the base for this high variability, but it's likely that environmental factors play here an important role. On the socioeconomic side, it's visible that or we could somehow distinguish between large and small scale collectors, so people that really have a big stake in order to collect and trading these plants or the fruits later on markets. But in general, if you see the range, what we observed, 30 euros to 205 euros on average, is rather also for this region per year is rather a small income. So it's just a side income for the season when the fruits are available. What we observed on the market is that the fruits itself are of often poor quality, so there is no real treatment or pre-harvest treatment of fruits, causing infestations by insects, sometimes also fungi. So the quality is really poor, and this is something what needs certainly to be done in order to promote this species further in the region. The main message for you would be that Russian olive in Gilgit-Baltistan is a minor crop, so it's not largely used, and only a few people have applied it so far or are consumers of it. Certainly a better apicultural management might increase the productivity of the species and might therefore also increase the quality for this product, and high potential of reclaiming soils and landscapes might be the most promising aspect for this species, as it's otherwise not too much else used, but for other species, for others in other studies, it was found that it is a real important species to reclaim soil because of this nitrogen fixation, but also because of its stability or stabilization character for soils and against soil erosion. Yeah, I would like to thank the interviewers that we have been interviewed during the time there. It was 2017. Also a great thank to one of our assistant Iftikhar Alam, as well as colleagues that we talked to in order to get more information. Feel free to contact me in case you are interested in this study region, but also in the species. University of Kassel, our working group, has an own Twitter account, as well as you can find myself on many platforms, but certainly ResearchGate is one of the most visible one for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for this very inspiring presentation. It was really interesting. We would have time for one quick question. At the end of the session, there will be 20 minutes time for more discussion. If for some general discussion and more specific discussion, but we could do one question now, if there is any question from the audience.
I have a small question, Michel.
Welcome.
Because if I understand, you mentioned that the low quality is mainly due to a lack of management skills, something, yeah. So what part of the management would be need to be improved? For example, pruning, soil management, I don't know. What do you mean?
Exactly. In total, there's many aspects. It's, by the way, we have not only considered Russian olive in the region, but also sea buckthorn and apple. And we found for all fruit crops problems in harvest, particularly in pruning. So tree density is a problem, sometimes too closely planted, sometimes no proper irrigation. So orchards fell dry and are dying off. There is a lack of pruning because of lack of materials. There is simply no ladders or very rare ladders or kind of clippers or scissors available. And also post-harvest handling of fruits is a major constraint, not only for Russian olive, but for all others. So they are contaminated with dust, with stones, with particles. They are dried on the rooftops, which is where birds and dust can access the fruit. So it's a main issue. And drying facilities would actually help a lot. Decentralized drying facilities would help a lot in order to increase these fruit qualities.
Yeah, to increase the farmer awareness about the management, increase the training and so on. Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we could proceed with our third speaker. If Alexa Vara shows up, please let me know, then we can put her forth. But yeah, for now, we continue with the third speaker, and that is Dagnija Lajdina from Latvian State Forest Research Institute, and she will be talking about ecosystem services in short rotation copies in agricultural land in Latvia. Dagnija, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm ready to present, and I hope that you see this big one slide. Is it so? Yeah.
Yes, we see it.
Yeah. So it's my pleasure today to present some small piece of our agroforestry studies, and that's about ecosystem services in short rotation copies on agriculture lands in Latvia. So the story begins in 2011. When we get funding for agriculture and agroforestry research, how to plant trees on agricultural land. And nowadays it's very actual because of Green Deal. We are going to plant plenty of trees, millions of trees, and there is very important to know how to manage them, because that's not enough to plant the tree. It's very, very, very important to maintain the field and to follow to the management. And there is in pictures how we started. So we started in something like desert. We planted trees which is suitable for agroforestry systems, and which is in the same time are suitable for short rotation copies or for short rotation forestry. And those ones are willows, poplars, alders, birches, also some maples, cherries, and lime were planted. And there was two approach to sow perennials below canopies of trees, but another one also occurred, and this and another ones, I like how it called how it translates Finnish people, they call them spontaneous accurate vegetation. And today's story is about agroforestry system and spontaneously accurate vegetation. That is the picture from field where our measurements were done. So after 3-4 years, something very, very similar to natural meadow occurred. We just need to harvest twice per year or 3 times per year in the beginning weeks. And there were enough seed bank in agriculture field. Despite of that field were managed for agriculture for 20 years. And seeds were still here. So we need just to left aside these areas to maintain them, and our beautiful meadows will come. And in forestry, usually we plant a lot of trees and later part of them cutting down. In this case, we planted very sparse, and because below canopies trees were enough light and enough nutrients for all of them, we got beautiful natural vegetation, which has several ecosystem services. The most important one is pollination. Those fields are very, very suitable for pollinators. Additionally to natural salixes, some spontaneously is coming in, and you could see that there are enough plants from early spring till the late autumn, which is flowering and which is doing this service as natural pollinators, which is source for nectar and which is source for pollens, and which is source for bees to survive and to produce honey for themselves as well for humans. There are also a lot of medical use plants, but the problem is that they are not in small patches and small pieces. They are more for a hobby picking up of medical plants as for industrial scale, because that's not possible to harvest one particular plant in the same time, but we could harvest these ones for forage. And forage is rich of species, and it could be suitable for not only for large scale industry, but also for pets, for domestic animals who need a lot of plants in this forage. And forage is small size and plenty of different grasses and legumes, and therefore we could get more higher, less, but more higher value and more higher productivity, quality product from these fields. Of course, it depends from canopies of trees which is planted under the vegetation, and those ones who started to earlier to close canopies, those ones after 3 and 4 years has less vegetation below, and also composition of species are not so rich as below almost as below betula. Because the almost closing canopies faster, and they have more leaves, and these leaves, they are working like mulch, and by the time vegetation below elders are decreasing, what I could not say about birches. And we also looked for phytoremediation plants, who of them could work as phytoremediators, because it's very often that such kind of plantations are planted in set-aside areas and also in marginal and polluted areas. So we looked on trees which could be planted for such purposes, as well for plants who could occur just spontaneously. And that field has very clayish soils, so it's dense and with problematic water regime during drought. It's the same as usually how these industrial and set-aside areas where is needs for phytoremediation and needs for use of phytoremediation plants. And finally, as it asked for very short presentation, just 10 minutes. And finally, we could say that there is a lot of plants which are accurate. It's 35 species together for forage, and there is a little bit less for phytoremediation or for medical use and for nectar plants. So the main lesson from this one is, if we are going to plant trees, let's take management of that fields. We will have beautiful spontaneous vegetation of plants, and we should not plant too much trees, and we should not plant too dense them. Then we'll got better results, and each particular trees will be bigger and more healthy, as when we have dense plantings with a lot of numbers of trees to fulfill targets of millions of trees planted per hectare. For thousands of hectares. And yeah, and finally, I thank you for attention. And if you have some question, please ask it now or later.
Thank you, Dagmir. That was a very interesting presentation. It was also very interesting to see that you have an agroforestry system that also fits very well to Northern Europe. So you hear quite little from agroforestry in Northern Europe. So that's really nice.
I would like to add that really in Latvia we have agroforestry systems, but they are not recognized as agroforestry systems. They are not listed as agroforestry systems, and officially there's no agroforestry in Latvia, but in real life they are.
Yes, thank you. We would have time for maybe one question, but at the end of the session, then there is 20 minutes to discuss, so then we can discuss further. Are there any questions from the audience?
There is a question from Bravin Giacomo. How do you manage possible toxic plants in forage?
Yeah, I could answer that we are in country where there's not so many toxic plants, and those ones which are toxic, they could be managed in the beginning, just to cut them down and not allow to spread. But there is a very limited amount of toxic plants here in Latvia. Okay. The same is for snakes and so on. Beautiful country.
Okay, thank you. Then we proceed with the fourth presentation, and our fourth speaker is Giovanni Trentanovi from the University of Padova in Italy. And the title of his presentation is Woodlands and Hedgerows of the Po Valley, Planning Instruments and Policy Implications on Biodiversity Conservation. Giovanni, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Everything good?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This presentation is the result of a long-term collaboration between the Department of Land, my Department of Environment, Agricultural Forestry of the University of Padova, and Veneto Agricoltura, which both were involved in the past few years in research project focusing on biodiversity conservation within the Po Plain. These are my contacts and the logo of the both two affiliations. So this work reports some evidences from published works, giving you insight on the relationship between biodiversity conservation, planning and management strategies within the lowland of the Veneto region, the southeast part of the Veneto region. Specifically, it's focused on the woody components like woodlands and rural hedgerows, which represent one of the most important natural and semi-natural elements of the rural landscape of the Po Plain. The study area focused on this part of plain that is bordered by the spring belt. It's mainly an intensively cultivated land which is heavily populated with a significant percentage of urbanized areas, big cities, but also small towns and several buildings scattered along the main and the secondary road, the so-called in scientific literature widespread urbanization area. Originally, Po Plain was completely different from today. In fact, was subjected to substantial transformation that had modified the landscape structure, as you can see from this picture on the left side of the slide, since the Roman centuriation in the 1st century before Christ, up to the industrial settlement of the 1970s. Originally, the Po Plain was characterized by forests, rivers mainly, and wetlands. Even now, we can observe some Roman centuriation in some part of the landscape structure. You can see in the central part of the slide some picture about this. Thanks to the road and field edges arrangement. You can see also on the right side the pollard trees that are along this kind of landscape structure. Nowadays, landscape structure is represented by a patchy mosaic of cultivated, mainly cropland and vineyard fields, from 1 hectare to less to several dozens, and the urban system with only small patches of natural and semi-natural ecosystems. There are many urban rural fringe, as you can see in the last picture. Okay, according to the regional map of the forest types, forests cover about 2% of the total study area of the lowland in Veneto. And the ancient forest, that is the focus of this slide, represent only a small portion, a very small portion of this area with few patches. In the top left picture, you can see the remnant of these woodlands that are under 10 hectares in yellow in our region. Even if they are very altered in their composition and structure, some of these forests are protected by Natura 2000 Habitat Directive. And these woodlands are very important, both for the conservation for landscape, but also very important for the conservation of amphibians and reptiles, protected by the Habitat Directive. In addition to this very important for biodiversity ecosystem services that are ancient woodlands, there are three types of different forest categories according to their origin. In the picture with the number 1, there are some small areas that are locally protected under regional and local planning instruments. These plant communities are the results of the abandonment of human activities of former land uses like quarries or depression within the rural landscape. We have also new or quite historical plantation, the picture number 2, that were established through incentives and funds derived by regional and European programs like rural development programs. And finally, the picture number 3, you can see the spontaneous woodlands dominated by non-native trees, in this case is Robinia pseudacacia seedlings, mainly on former industrial areas and along railway and abandoned crops. Of course, this is a potentiality for biodiversity, but also they represent a problem for the level of and the quality of ecosystem services provision of this kind of rural landscape. In addition to forest, rural hedgerows are really important ecological corridors in our landscape, as they function as a connection between the meta-population in this very fragmented rural landscape. In particular, with our team, we studied the effect on biodiversity, the vascular flora, particularly of the effect of the complexity of vertical structure, as you can see, the arrangement of high trees, coppices, polar trees, and shrub within a hedgerow, and the effect of this structural vertical structure with the different within the different landscape, as you can see in the picture on the right part of the slide. Site selection criteria were conditioned according to the landscape structure in deep, which has been shaped by the aforementioned shapes or changes in land uses. One of these studies in particular highlighted the high variability and the complexity of the composition and vertical structure of rural hedgerows between different landscape structure, as we seen before, biggest and smaller field properties. And so, as you can see by the graphs showing the relationship between area and species, you can see how important are the area of these hedgerows, and also in the other graph, also the complexity, how the complexity of the vertical structure influence the native woody species richness of each hedgerow. Within this state of art of biodiversity conservation and natural elements, the strategies for conservation and for the enhancement of these natural, semi-natural woody elements have to be developed according to the complex European, national, and particularly in Italy and in our region, regional and local planning framework. Rural landscape, in fact, according to the national and regional laws, is affected by changes from the 70s to today. From the agrarian landscape, considered just for crop production activities, it became a rural landscape, considered for its capacity to provide manifold ecosystem services. In parallel, as you can see from the picture, the ecological network became the main strategy to protect biodiversity within this very anthropized rural landscape through the identification of several and widespread connected natural and semi-natural areas at different spatial scales. You can see in the right side of the picture the very complex structure of planning tools that jointly define the regulatory framework for conservation and enhancement of woodlands and hedgerows in the Po Plain. This is just an example, we have not so much time to go in deeply, of some management and conservation measures and its related planning instruments for some of the natural and semi-natural woody elements we focused on. Just some example of these acronyms that are related to the PAF with its Natura 2000 plan, or UP urban plan, or a rural policy regulation, or WMP water management plan. All are considered some part of management and enhancement of these natural elements. And besides scientific evidence and conservation practices addressed in local planning and management tools, we have to consider, of course, approach at landscape scale. Land management has to be done also according to their landscape plan, according to the national and regional law, and that even for an intensively cultivated and urbanized area like our study sites, there are several different historical arrangement and elements that have to be preserved and evaluated in ecological diversity restoring practices. Here you can see just two examples from the landscape unit from the landscape plan within our study areas, which highlight two different structures that have to be considered in planning policy. So,
sorry, Giovanni, please.
Yeah, a conclusion.
Okay.
Our analysis. You can see several studies that carry out biodiversity conservation purposes. However, still work still needs to be done to assess their ecological function at landscape scale, leading to a definition of ecological strategy consistently through different plans and management opportunities. And as highlighted in this slide, there is a necessity to work on integrated governance, which links planning policy, stakeholder involvement, like landowners, and possibility of acquiring funds and ordinary, especially ordinary management. Thank you, and sorry for the time skipped.
Thank you, Giovanni. That was a really great presentation. It's also really nice to see that agroforestry can also be successful in a very intensive in an area characterized by intensive farming. That's really good to see. Maybe we have time for one quick question that we can discuss also later on after the session. Are there any burning questions you would like to ask from Giovanni?
There is no question in the chat,
No?
in the question and answer.
Okay, then we proceed with the fifth presentation. Our fifth presenter will be Nora Cigeti from the University of Sopron in Hungary, and she will be talking about the effects of tree species composition in soil-related biodiversity in shelter belts. Nora, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. My sound is coming back, so it's quite awful, but I try to solve it.
The sound can come back if not everybody has the microphone muted. So if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone.
So if you can see my PPT.
Yes, it's fine.
Then thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to present our results in this topic. Our research investigated the impact of shelter belts with different tree species composition on soil-related diversity compared with semi-natural grass and forest patches. We concentrated on the diversity and species composition of herbaceous and soil microarthropod communities. Several studies reflect the ecological importance of uncropped habitats in intensively managed agricultural environment. These uncropped habitats are typically shelter beds, forest patches, and grassy field margins. Usually their biodiversity enhancing effects are mentioned, which is mainly based on research in bird and above ground arthropod communities, while herb vegetation and soil mesofauna are barely mentioned. However, the diversity of these communities sensitively reflect on soil quality and strongly influence the composition and richness of the food chain based on them, and thus the overall biodiversity of the agroforestry system. Flowering herb vegetation have a key role in supporting pollination, for example, while the soil mesofauna increase the productivity and the long-term sustainability of arable fields through organic degradation and nutrient recycling processes. The aim of our research was to assess the importance of different shelter bed types in the soil biological quality and the diversity and species composition of the herb and soil mesofauna communities in an intensively managed agricultural environment. The examined shelter bed system lies in a plain area of northwest Hungary with a continental climate. The intensively managed fields are separated with shelter beds, which were established to protect the fields against wind damage and soil erosion. Two types of shelter beds have been designated for examination. One of them is a black locust dominated plantation with green ash. Both three species are non-native invasive species in Hungary, but they are frequently planted in shelter beds. The other type of shelter beds is a native field maple field elm stand. Examples were taken inside the shelter beds, in the adjacent grassy edges and crop fields. These were the agroforestry plots, and as control plots, an oak plantation and a grass patch were used. The percentage cover of the herbaceous vegetation was recorded in 25 square meter sized quadrats in all habitat types, with 3 replicates in the early summer, and the soil samples were taken from the midpoints of these quadrats. Special funnel was used to extract the microarthropods from the soil samples. The specimens were classified into main taxonomy groups, and in addition, springtails, columbola individuals were determined to species level. For the analysis, we used diversity profiles, social behavior type categories, cluster analysis, correspondence analysis, and the soil biological quality index. Main soil properties also were determined from the soil samples. About the results, the vegetation survey shows that the highest species numbers were found in the control grass and the control forest habitats, while only a few species were found in the cultivated sites. The diversity of the shelter bed edges are higher than it was experienced inside the shelter beds. Both types of shelter beds are poor in species, and as the right-hand side figure shows, the majority of the herbaceous plants belong to the disturbance tolerant and weed categories, with gray color. independently from the tree species composition. More favorable species appeared only on the control forest and control grass plots, while more ruderal competitors were found in the agroforestry plots with red color. Typically, forest-related herbaceous species were found only in the forest patch. The soil biological quality index is based on the presence of main taxonomic groups of the soil mesofauna. The lowest values were associated with cultivated plots, while the highest were found in the forest control plot. This index is significantly higher in the native shelter belt compared to the black locust stand. The grassy edges of the shelter beds did not differ significantly from the control grass. Regarding to the Columbola community, the cluster analysis showed the separation of the cultivated sites. Within the second main group, the grassy and the forest habitats form two separate clusters, but the isolation of the shelter beds from the control forest also can be observed. The correspondence analysis showed that besides soil parameters, for example, organic matter content or moisture, the herb species richness and the naturalness value are also main factors of the species composition of Columbola. So we could conclude that shelter beds planted in agricultural fields are, of course, of high importance for wildlife, but they are not suitable habitats for forest-related herb species, nor the majority of agricultural weeds. Just a few disturbance-tolerant and weed species were present in the understory layer. In contrast, the grassy edge habitats are quite important for a wide range of agricultural weed species. Our research highlighted the importance of even secondary grass and forest fragments in protecting the herbaceous diversity in the agricultural landscape. Based on our results, both types of shelter beds and the grassy edges have an essential role in preserving soil biological quality in the agricultural landscape. However, the flora and the fauna is less varied in the shelter belts compared to the control forest. The choice of the tree species has a greater impact on the mesofauna compared to the herbaceous vegetation. So thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will try to answer, or you can contact me via this email. You are welcome to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. That was really interesting. Very nice to see the Hungarian shelter belt system. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, there is a question for Nora from Michel Pastor. Which tree species were present in the forest? Did you study also conifers and their impact on soil fauna?
Thank you, Michael. No. So the control forest is an oak plantation, and the two shelter belts are, one of them is the black locust and the green ash, and the other one is field maple, field elm plantation. So in this study, the conifers were not included.
Okay, thank you. Are there more questions for Nora?
No, for Nora, no. There is a previous question to Giovanni Trentanovi How much local communities or their cooperation were important in creating these biodiversity pockets, may I say that, and ecological corridors? Was it an issue at all?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Of course, it is an issue, especially in these past decades where the funds for renaturalization and afforestation are multiplied from the rural development program, but also regional and national funds for afforestation. And of course, people have to be involved at two levels. I say from the participation in the urban and landscape planning, firstly, and after in the management of these natural and semi-natural elements. And in this case, as you have seen in the last slide, the association of owners, of landowners, can be the hinge, sorry, to the implementation of renaturalization policies. So the answer is yes, are fundamental, the involvement of stakeholders and owners.
Thank you. Then before, we're a bit behind schedule, but we still have some time for a general discussion. But before we proceed with the general discussion, I would like to ask if Alexa Vara has already arrived, or another member of the team who volunteered to give the presentation. I checked the participant list, but when I checked, I couldn't see.
I can see also.
Any
She should be on the top of the screen, not in.
Yes, because it starts with A. Yes. Okay. Then we can still have some time for the general discussion. Are there any, based on these very great presentations what we saw, are there any issues what you would like to raise? Who would like to open the discussion? I have one issue myself. So now we have seen a very nice variety of very different systems from very different places, and yeah, there are clear benefits for biodiversity. So these systems not only produce a high level of ecosystem services, but they are very beneficial for biodiversity. Some of these systems are hard to manage. Other systems are easier to manage. So actually, if there is a will, if the farmers or politicians want, there could be a system for everybody. So I wanted to ask the presenters, do you have some feeling, or what's your opinion in your country? What would be the best way to promote your system or these or other systems in your country? Then both from a farmer point of view, or if you have experience with politicians, planners, then you can also answer for a politician planner point of view. How can we motivate farmers and other people involved, other stakeholders, to have more of these systems? Are there any? Okay.
I could. I think that in Baltics, maybe only in Latvia, but I have a feeling that the same is also in Estonia and in Lithuania. There's misunderstanding with the term of agroforestry. A normal local person seems they as synonym to short rotation copies or as synonym to plantations, because those are trees on agricultural land, and we we also already doing it, and we will do more to explain that willows and agroforestry, that's not the same. Agroforestry is that trees are on agricultural land and we still have agriculture production, but trees are not agriculture production. So trees could be agriculture crop, but in agroforestry system, we have both. We have trees and agriculture production with traditional agriculture methods like that. Yep.
Yeah, it's a common aspect in many countries, at least in Europe, also in Mediterranean countries. And with Michel, also with other colleagues, we are working on agroforestry since many years. And we found that many farmers are not aware that they are growing agroforestry many times. So there is a lack of knowledge about agroforestry, not only at farm level with the farmers, but also policy level. So one of the most important aspects we have to improve through EURAF is to increase the awareness of people engaging agroforestry, to increase the knowledge, to increase the management, to increase the knowledge about the quality of the products they can obtain, the environmental services, and so on.
I agree. The key word is recognize agroforestry system, because it already existing, but they are not recognized and they are not listed.
Yeah, also in statistical office or statistical data in Italy, for example, we don't have the voice agroforestry. We have different type. We have to go to look if it is agroforestry or not.
May I?
Yes, sure.
Yes. Yeah, the main thing, the recognition is one thing, but I think in the last couple of years it has been quite vital that ecoforestry is important, or is at least needed to, well, to cope with the increasing carbon dioxide levels and with soil erosion problems, etc. The main problem in what I know, at least for Germany, is that also the appreciation in terms of policy and subsidies for agroforestry systems is simply not given. So nobody feels stimulated to cultivate something for which he doesn't get any money. So this is the big problem. I mean, everything is subsidized in the European Union on agriculture, but basically not, I mean, specialized products can be obtained from agroforestry systems, which can fetch high prices. So this is a strategy individual farmers might choose, but on the broader scale, people fear that they simply lose space to cultivate the commercial crop, which is very, which they are sure they can get money from within 1 year.
Agree, because there's listed that in previous common agriculture payment system, good or well managed agriculture land, it means no more than 70 trees per hectare. And that's all.
Can I just add a little things? Working in Italy, especially in landscape and urban planning, the problem is also, like you said, the terminology problems, at least in Italy, because we have different plans that involve different specific aspects of land management. So just hydro, like I said, like a ecological corridor, but not with a vision of more at landscape scale of agroforestry pattern. So, and also the law, national and regional law, are not connected with this point of view. So there is also an overlap of different terminology with different aims, with different laws. We know in Italy, of course, as of course also Andrea knows, of course, but I think also in some other European states.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I just want to a compliment to this, to the saying by Giovanni. Also, not only for in Europe, it's the case. Also, what I found in Asia and Pakistan, for instance, sea buckthorn, nobody feels responsible for this crop. Agriculturists consider this as a tree or as a shrub species, while the forest department does not consider it because it's rather a riparian forest or a riparian species, although in a riparian forest, but not with no clear forestry purpose. So this is, I think the same applies here, and it's certainly important to get people and to get policy more aware of this group of trees and shrubs and their importance for forestry as well as food.
I was fascinated by the diversity of agroforestry in the Po Valley. Because it's a very intensive agricultural area. What motivates the farmers in the Po Valley to practice agroforestry? Like, I'm from the Netherlands. In the most intensively farmed parts of the Netherlands, I think there's very low adoption of agroforestry, and I think also in Flanders and the north of France, in the most productive areas, you see quite little agroforestry being practiced. But in the Po Valley, that's quite a nice example that it is also possible in intensive agricultural areas. Do you have some idea what motivates them, Giovanni?
Giovanni?
You're muted.
The microphone.
Can you repeat the microphone? Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, did you get my question?
No, I didn't get your question.
Oh, okay. Because the Po Valley is a very intensive agricultural area, and in many parts of like in the intensive part in Finland and in the Netherlands, north of France, so where there is intensive farming, you see quite little agroforestry. But in the Po Valley, there are good examples of agroforestry. So what motivates the farmers? What drives them?
Difficult question, but
Yeah,
I think one of the main point for this agroforestry system in Po Valley, in Po Plain, I think is like, of course, Veneto Agricoltura brings on is this kind of association between farmers, among farmers, that can create a common type of work in agroforestry and in afforestation programs. So, for example, bringing the funds of environmental programs and regional programs with a strategy to implement, to enhance some specific part of the landscape where they are owners of the land. Also for tourism and slow path for people that is now is taking more and more important, is an important aspect, an important side of the Po Plain, of this part of the Po Plain. Also with the small farms for education, for example, and so also this new landscape with more trees are also important for this kind of tourism, and of course also for them, for money for these people.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. I think we have is 4:16 at 4:20 starts the next session. You can choose which one you are interested to look. You have to leave this room and enter in the room that you want to follow.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for
Thank you to
joining.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you for joining the session. Pity it's over already, but fortunately we still have 2.5 days left for interesting presentations and inspiring discussions. And I understood that next year we try again in Sardinia. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully we see each other in Sardinia next year. Okay, but enjoy the rest of the week and see you in the other sessions. Okay.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.